Here is something I told nearly every client who walked into my office in the final years before retirement, and almost none of them believed me at first. The number you have been told to save toward is probably not the number you actually need. Not because you have been given bad advice, but because the rule most people use was designed for a general population, and your situation is almost certainly not general. I spent 25 years as a financial planner working with pre-retirees and newly retired Americans. And in that time, I sat across from hundreds of people who had spent decades saving toward a target that turned out to be the wrong target, either far too high or occasionally genuinely too low. The people who got it right were almost never the ones who followed the standard rule. They were the ones who understood what the rule was actually measuring and what it was quietly leaving out. That is what this video is about. By the time we are done, you are going to have a completely different framework for thinking about how much your portfolio actually needs to generate in retirement. Not a rough estimate, a structure. One that accounts for your income level, your Social Security timing, and every income source that quietly reduces the pressure on your savings. And I want to plant one thought right now that I will come back to before the end, because I think it will surprise you. Most people assume their portfolio has to carry the full weight of retirement. The data says it only needs to carry about half. Hold on to that. We'll get there. The 70 to 80% rule, where it came from and why it may not apply to you. Here's something that surprised nearly every client I worked with on this, including some who had been careful, disciplined savers their entire careers. The rule you have likely heard for decades, that you need to replace 70 to 80% of your pre-retirement income once you stop working, is not wrong exactly, but it is almost certainly not right for your specific situation. Think about where that logic comes from. Once you retire, several real expenses do disappear. You stop contributing to your 401k, payroll taxes fall away, work-related costs, commuting, a professional wardrobe, the lunches you bought because you were too tired to pack something, those go away too. Maybe the mortgage is paid off. So naturally, the thinking goes, your spending should fall. And 70 to 80% became the standard estimate for how far it falls. The problem is not the logic. The problem is what the rule assumes underneath it, that your income and your spending have always moved in proportion, that as your income grew over your career, your spending grew with it dollar for dollar. And for many households, that is simply not how it worked. Here is what the actual data shows, and this is where things start to behave differently than most people expect. When researchers examine real retirement spending, using sources like the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Survey and longitudinal household spending studies, the range they find is wide. Retirees typically spend somewhere between 54 and 87% of their pre-retirement income. But the more important finding is where most households cluster within that range. Multiple analyses consistently show that median retirement spending falls into the 50 to 70% range, not 80, not 75, closer to 60. And it does not stop there. Spending does not just drop at retirement and hold steady, it continues to fall over time. Research shows that after age 65, real spending tends to decline by roughly 1 to 2% per year. Within just the first 3 to 4 years of retirement, spending often drops 5 to 12% below pre-retirement levels. One analysis found that households approaching retirement were spending around $70,000 per year, but that fell to approximately $52,000 in early retirement and continued declining from there. Now, I want to pause here because every time I share data like this, someone raises a very fair concern. They say, maybe people are spending less because they are running out of money. Maybe that decline is not a lifestyle choice, it is a financial constraint. That is a reasonable thing to wonder, but it is not what the data shows. These spending declines appear consistently, including in households with more than sufficient assets to maintain higher spending if they chose to. This is a structural pattern, not a distress signal. And honestly, when you think about the daily life of an 80-year-old compared to a 60-year-old, common sense supports it. Travel slows, big purchases taper, status-related spending, the car, the wardrobe, the renovations, quietly disappears. This is not deprivation, it is just a different season of life. Why your income level changes everything. Here's the part that gets genuinely interesting, and that the standard rule completely ignores. The higher your pre-retirement income was, the smaller your replacement ratio actually needs to be. This is counterintuitive for a lot of people, but the data is consistent on this point. And if you're a middle or upper middle income earner, this may be the most personally relevant thing in this entire video. Fidelity's research breaks this down by income tier in a way I find more useful than almost any other single table in retirement planning. If your household income was under $50,000, Fidelity's guidance suggests targeting about 80% replacement. At that income level, a larger share of spending is already going towards essentials: housing, food, utilities, healthcare, transportation. There's less discretionary spending to compress in retirement, which is why the ratio stays higher. Between 50,000 and 80,000, the target drops to around 75%. Between 80,000 and 120,000, it falls to approximately 70%. And once household income moves above $120,000, the suggested replacement range falls to roughly 55 to 65%. Why the difference? Because as income increases, a growing share of earnings goes towards things that simply stop in retirement: higher marginal tax rates, payroll taxes, retirement contributions themselves, commuting costs, career-related spending, and in many cases, temporary lifestyle upgrades during peak earning years. In percentage terms, higher earners often don't need to replace as much of their income to maintain the same lifestyle, because a meaningful portion of that income was never really funding their lifestyle in the first place. I do want to add one honest note of caution here. Even at $200,000 or $300,000 a year, I would be careful about dropping below a 50% replacement ratio without a very honest look at your specific spending. Some expenses have a way of becoming permanent: a heathscaper, business class travel, a home in a higher property tax area, dining and travel that has become part of your identity rather than an occasional treat. If those are part of your life, they need to be part of your plan. A table gives you direction, your actual spending gives you the answer. But the directional finding matters. Replacement ratios are not flat. They move with income. And for many people watching this, the real target is meaningfully lower than the one they've been working towards. The number that actually determines how hard your portfolio has to work. Most people discover this part only after they have already retired, and by then, the options are genuinely different. Everything we have talked about so far has been about the total income you need to replace, but that is only half the question. The other half, the one that actually determines how much pressure your portfolio is under, is where that income comes from. And this is where Social Security changes the entire picture. Here is what I want you to picture. 3 buckets. The first is your total retirement spending need. The second is what Social Security covers. The third, the gap between them, is what your portfolio actually has to generate. Most people spend their entire careers focused on the first bucket and the third bucket. Very few spend enough time thinking clearly about the second one. Fidelity's research on this is worth looking at closely. At a pre-retirement income of $50,000, the total replacement target is about 80%. Social Security is expected to cover roughly 35% of that, which means your savings need to generate about 45%. At $100,000 of pre-retirement income, the total target drops to around 72%. Social Security covers approximately 27%. Savings, still about 45%. At $200,000, the total target falls to about 61%. Social Security covers roughly 16%, and savings still approximately 45%. Do you see what stayed constant? Across income levels, across replacement ratios, the portfolio share of the burden holds remarkably steady at around 45% of pre-retirement income. Not 70, not 80, 45. This is what I refer to as Fidelity's rule of 45, and it reframes the entire question. Your portfolio is not trying to replace your income, it is trying to cover roughly half of it. The rest comes from Social Security, and for some households from pensions, part-time work, or other guaranteed income sources. Let me make this tangible. Take a household earning $70,000 a year before retirement. Fidelity's guidance suggests targeting about 75% replacement, $52,500 per year in retirement spending. If savings are expected to cover 45% of pre-retirement income, the portfolio needs to generate roughly $31,500 per year. The remaining $21,000 would come from Social Security. At a 4.7% withdrawal rate, generating $31,500 annually requires a portfolio of approximately $670,000. That's a very different number than you get if you assume the portfolio has to carry the full $52,500 alone. I want to slow down here for just a moment because I think this is a good place to check in. Think about your own situation right now. What is your expected household Social Security benefit, even a rough estimate? And when you've pictured your retirement income, has Social Security been a clear, counted line item or more of a vague assumption in the background? Whatever your answer, what comes next may shift how you see that number. What happens when there are two of you? Here is a detail that quietly changes the math for a significant number of households, and that most people have never fully calculated. Everything in Fidelity's replacement ratio modeling assumes a single income earner. But many households are not single income, and even in households where one spouse worked full-time and the other did not, the math shifts in a way that most people have never fully calculated. Consider a household that earned $70,000 per year. One spouse worked, the other was home raising children or worked part-time and had limited Social Security credits of their own. Once both spouses reach full retirement age, the non-working spouse is generally entitled to up to 50% of the primary worker's full benefit. So if the primary worker receives $21,000 per year from Social Security, the spouse may receive $10,500. That is $31,500 combined from Social Security alone. The household still needs $52,500 in total retirement income. But now Social Security is covering more than $31,000 of that, which means the portfolio only needs to generate about $21,000 per year. At a 4.7% withdrawal rate, that implies a portfolio of roughly $446,000, not $670,000. Same household, same income, same spending need. The difference is simply accounting for both income sources clearly. This is why retirement planning is income source thinking, not portfolio-only thinking. Every reliable income stream you layer in, Social Security, a pension, part-time work, a rental property, directly reduces the pressure on your portfolio. And when portfolio withdrawals fall, sequence risk declines, longevity risk improves, and the entire structure becomes more stable. The one decision that quietly changes your portfolio requirement. Now here's the part most people never fully grasp until they're standing right at the edge of the decision. When you choose to claim Social Security, the exact age, you're not just choosing a monthly benefit amount. You're choosing how much weight your portfolio has to carry for the rest of your life. Fidelity modeled this clearly for a household with $100,000 of pre-retirement income. The total retirement spending need is about 72%, $72,000 per year. That number does not change. But watch what happens to the portfolio share as the claiming age shifts. Claiming at 62, Social Security covers roughly 17% of the need. The portfolio must cover about 55%. Claiming at 65, Social Security covers about 22%. Portfolio, around 50%. At full retirement age of 67, Social Security covers approximately 27%. Portfolio, about 45%. Waiting until 70, Social Security covers roughly 32%. Portfolio, about 40%. The total income need is identical at every age, but the portfolio's burden swings by 15 percentage points, from 55% down to 40%, depending on when you claim. Let me translate that into portfolio dollars using the same $100,000 example and a 4.7% withdrawal rate. Claiming at 62 requires a portfolio generating $55,000 per year, approximately $1.17 million. Waiting until 70 requires a portfolio generating $40,000 per year, approximately $850,000. That's a difference of roughly $320,000 in required savings, simply from timing. I want to be careful here, because this is not an argument for always waiting. When to claim Social Security is one of the most personal decisions in all of retirement planning. Your health, your spouse's age and benefit, how long you expect to live, whether you have enough to bridge the gap if you stop working before 70, your comfort with market risk in the years before claiming. These are not small factors. There is no universally right answer. But what this comparison illustrates is the magnitude of the decision. When you choose a claiming age, you are not just locking in a monthly check. You are setting the structure of your retirement income and determining how much your portfolio has to carry for the next 20 or 30 years. I want to tell you about someone I worked with, because I think her situation will feel familiar. Her name was Carolyn. She was 63, had spent 29 years as an assistant principal at a middle school outside Fort Wayne, Indiana. She had a modest pension through the state, about $1,100 a month, and she had a 403B with $412,000 in it. Her husband had passed away 4 years earlier, and she was doing this alone. She was careful with money. She was not afraid of numbers, but she had one question she had been carrying for 2 years and had never quite been able to answer. She did not know if what she had was enough to actually retire, or if she needed to keep working another 3 or 4 years just to feel safe. When we sat down together, I asked her what number she had been using as her retirement target. She said she had always assumed she needed to replace about 80% of her salary, which was $74,000. So her target was roughly $59,000 a year. And when she looked at her combined income from the pension and Social Security at 67, the gap felt large. Her portfolio, she figured, would need to generate somewhere between $30,000 and $35,000 a year, and that felt shaky against $412,000. But here was the assumption she had been carrying, and it is one I heard more times than I can count. She had been estimating her Social Security benefit using an early claiming figure. She had mentally been picturing herself claiming at 63 or 64 because that was when she thought she might stop working. She had never sat down and looked at what delaying to 67, her full retirement age, would actually mean for her benefit. When we ran the actual numbers, her full retirement age benefit was meaningfully higher than what she had been assuming. Her combined income from the pension and Social Security at 67 was enough to cover her spending comfortably, with her portfolio only needing to generate about $14,000 per year to cover the rest. At her balance, that was entirely sustainable. She did not need 3 or 4 more years. She needed a clearer picture of the income she already had. She retired 8 months later. I think about Carolyn when I talk about this because the fear she was carrying was not really about money. It was about not knowing. The uncertainty of not being able to confirm with real numbers that the life she had worked toward was actually within reach. That specific not knowing, that is what retirement planning is really trying to solve. Bringing it all together. Here is what I want you to take from everything we have covered, because I think there is one organizing idea underneath all of it. The 80% rule is not wrong. It is incomplete. It was designed as a starting point, not a destination. And for many households, particularly middle and upper middle income earners, it quietly overestimates what the portfolio actually needs to carry, because it does not account for the income structure that already exists around it. What the data consistently shows is this. Real retirement spending tends to be lower than the standard rule suggests, and it continues to fall over time. Replacement ratios decline as income increases, meaning higher earners generally need to replace a smaller share. Social Security absorbs a meaningful portion of baseline expenses, and the portfolio's actual burden across income levels tends to cluster around 45% of pre-retirement income, not 70 or 80. In the age at which you claim Social Security doesn't just change your monthly benefit, it materially changes the structure of everything your portfolio has to carry. None of this means you need less. It means you need to ask better questions. Not, what percentage of my income do I need to replace, but rather, what will I actually spend, and where will that income come from? What does Social Security cover and when? What income sources exist beyond my portfolio? And what gap remains, the gap that is truly the portfolio's job? When you answer those questions with real numbers rather than rules of thumb, retirement stops being a guess. It becomes something you can actually plan around. Conclusion. Before you close this out, I want to give you one concrete thing to do, something that will take about 15 minutes and will tell you more about where you actually stand than hours of general research. Write down 3 numbers. Your estimated monthly Social Security benefit at your full retirement age. You can find this on the SSA website at ssa.gov by creating a My Social Security account if you have not already. Your expected monthly spending in retirement, not a guess, but your actual current spending adjusted for what you know will change, and the gap between them, the amount your portfolio genuinely needs to cover each month. That gap, annualized, divided by a reasonable withdrawal rate, is the portfolio number that actually belongs to your retirement. Not a rule of thumb, your number. If something in this video helped answer a question you have been quietly carrying, I would genuinely love to hear it in the comments. I read every one. And if you know someone working through these same decisions, a sibling, a friend, a spouse who keeps putting this conversation off, send this to them. Retirement planning is always clearer when you're not working through it alone.